And hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Pumpkin Coptercast, the only video game show. Yeah, and so today I am talking with Chris Totten about the game he is currently working on, which is I can remember the names of things, I swear. Little Nemo and the Nightmare Fiends, which is right up there with, Limbo Inside and Little Nightmares in the genre of, giant headed kids going through trauma, I'm assuming.
That's actually pretty accurate to the original comic strip.
Yeah, so we'll start with just an introduction of you.
Hi, my name is Chris Totten. I'm a game developer, founder of Pie for Breakfast Studios. I'm also a, game design professor at Kent State University in Ohio, across several of their campuses, including the Kent, Stark, and Tuscarawas campuses. I don't know where to start. I have a background in architecture and have written a bunch of stuff about games and architecture, including a book people seem to like a lot. Um, but I make a lot of video games, and I also put on game festivals with museums. So I'm really interested in the intersections between games and art and design and all that other fun stuff.
Okay. And, when did you first discover video games?
Um, I mean, it's kind of hard to remember because, like, I'm 35, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm of that age where video games were just like around. Um, so I remember like kids in my neighborhood had video games, like they had Atari and they had the NES, and I remember going over to the neighbor across the street's house and like we would play Super Mario Brothers and everything. And I remember watching Super Mario Brothers and just being blown away because it was like, wow, it's like the cartoons on TV except I can control it. That's amazing. So I really I think we just grew up with them and it became like the social thing to do in the neighborhood. Like you'd play outside and then it would get dark or it'd start raining and then you'd go inside and you'd play video games. So it was a nice like social activity because we got really good at like taking turns with them and everything. But um, it was just like a thing we all did.
Okay. And what would you say is your favorite game and or games growing up?
My favorite game growing up, and one that I still say is my favorite game, is Super Mario Brothers 3. And in fact, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sitting in my home office with my Super Mario Brothers 3 poster behind me, right next to my Little Nemo, the Nightmare Fiends poster. Um, and I say it's still my favorite game because like I've actually gotten yelled at for that. People were like, "Well, you're just ignoring like decades of game design." It's like, yeah, but you know, no game will ever be that game that kind of like blew my mind as a 4-year old, 5-year old again, right?
Yeah.
So and I've loved many games since. But yeah, so that's still one of my favorite games. I mean, in terms of more modern things, like games I've really liked a lot include like Portal, Journey. Those have a special place, in my heart because like I played them with my wife, but they're also really great, and they've also been like hugely influential on some of the work I've done and like the design I've thought about and things like that. Also, um, Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, like even more recent, just again kind of like I loved that interpretation of Hyrule so much. It felt so amazing to be in that place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I it's hard to pinpoint like besides that one that really just has always been close to my heart. It's always hard to pinpoint like just one at this point after playing games for so many years.
Okay. And put it just what would you say is your favorite game and or games now? I mean, I know you said Super Mario Bros. 3, but is there any game that you felt has captured like that specific feeling as close as possible nowadays?
Um, you know, like I said, Breath of the Wild I think was really cool. It's fun to watch games in my kids' eyes. So things that we've played together a lot include like, especially this past year, a lot of the Super Mario games again, like Mario 3D World and Galaxy and things like that. Um, I really love Metroidvanias a
Mm-hmm.
lot, a lot. Um, so like probably once a year I'll pop in Super Metroid or something like that. But my kids have been getting into Castlevanias pretty recently. Um, so we've been playing some of the old Castlevanias. But then in terms of like newer stuff, um, Hollow Knight has we spent a lot of time with Hollow Knight. We really
Mm-hmm.
like that in our house. Uh, I kind of feel like I need to go back to Hyper Light Drifter again. I really love that game. Um, so I don't know, just like a variety of kind of similar to. I don't often get to play them with my kids around, but I'm also really into like I love Doom 2016. That was like one of my favorite games. I'm really loving Doom Eternal right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I try to get that one in when my kids are supposed to be like napping or in bed, and then they come downstairs and be like, "Dad, it's not scary." I'm like, "That's not the point." Uh, and I really shouldn't let you be seeing this. What else? Hades has been amazing. I haven't gotten a whole lot of time to spend with Hades, but I really liked it. I mean, Supergiant does amazing work. And then, um, oh yeah, I mean, like replaying the Dishonored games.
Mm-hmm.
Dishonored gave me that feeling that I had missed for so long without a new Half-Life game. Like there's just I mean and some of the same people were involved, but like I think they were involved. But that world is so well like fleshed out. I love it. It's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
I really love those games a lot.
Okay, and so let's just pretend it's at least at minimum probably like a year, year and a half, 2 years from now when things like conventions can actually safely happen again.
Knock on wood. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, get your vaccines if you can, everyone. And like you had a booth somewhere, like a PAX, and someone was just walking by and they saw it, and asked you to explain this game about a giant-headed kid in a nightmare world. How would you like? What would be your elevator pitch that you'd give
Well,
them?
I'd say, hey, uh, thanks for coming by. This is Little Nemo and the Nightmare Fiends. It's a big explorable platformer where with hand drawn animation where you can play as four different characters with unique powers and you can freely switch between them as you play to do really cool platforming combos and reach places that look like they logically shouldn't be reachable. Um, and it's based on a really old comic strip from 1905 that is in the public domain, but which also spun off a bunch of movies, or a movie from the 1980s that people really love, and a classic NES game that people also really love. So we're taking that world of Slumberland, and we're trying to create something that's a little bit that I would stop way before this, but we're not at the booth now. I'm explaining for your podcast audience, but we're trying to create something that's a little like Little Samson, if you know that game at all, with the four selectable characters, a little bit Demon's Crest, a little bit Shantae, So we're trying to make something really cool that scratches all those like big explorable world itches that I just hinted at.
Okay. And like you mentioned that this is from an old comic that has since
Mhm.
has been made into like so many things, and so does like the setting and the mechanics and the everything of the game. Does that come from like any one interpretation of like the Little Nemo franchise, or you and yours like trying to make like an original thing just set in this world?
So when when I realized that like the little Nemo, because I've been a you were talking about, you were asking about like, oh, that period of growing up with video games, right? When I was growing up with video games, you'd always go to the grocery store on like Friday, and you'd pick a game to rent for the weekend, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the games that I remember renting a few times was Little Nemo the Dream Master for the NES. And like there's just something about that game, like in it's very good. Like it's really nice looking. It has really interesting game mechanics. It's put together in this really weird way where like one level is really about the animal. So for listeners who don't know what this game is on the NES, not my game, but the NES game, you are Little Nemo from the movie, and you would feed candy to animals, and you'd try to collect 6 keys in every world to get out. So the maps were like kind of open ended a little bit, which was really neat. Except sometimes you'd be on auto scroll levels where you'd have to get the keys, and there were no animals. Except sometimes there were levels where there were animals, and it seems like somebody forgot to put the keys in, then remembered it at the last minute, so they put all the keys next to the exit, so you just like get them all and then go to the exit. And then except sometimes you can feed candy to animals, but you can also shoot lasers with a magic wand from the movie. It's all a bit like all over the place, and I love that about it. It's kind of endearing in a way. Um, but we look, obviously we can't do a. Oh, anyway, so years later, like again, something about this game, like I remembered it. It really stood out to me. It helped that it was a Capcom game, so even though it was a little all over the place, it was still like very high, like well made, high quality game on the NES.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember like looking it up and like, oh yeah, what was that game? And then I saw these comics, and I was like, what are these? And again, my background's in architecture, so these comic strips are like, if you've never seen them before, go look them up. Little Nemo in Slumberland. They are like, comics don't look like this. They are just gorgeous, and the use of perspective and architectural rendering, and you know I read a bunch of them and then later learned about them. The guy who invented them was named Winsor McKay, and he was this cartoonist in the early 1900s and a pioneer in comic strips when it was still this like nascent art form. But then he also went on to like, he didn't create animation, but he was one of the first like pioneers of animation to create some like modern techniques that we still use today. And if you see his animations compared to what was being done before then, they are like totally steps ahead, and then steps ahead of everything after him, and like until Walt Disney, right? And I do remember as a kid seeing his animations. Like, if you've ever heard of Gertie the dinosaur, it's an animation where like a dinosaur comes out and stomps around, and like her trainer yells at her. It was like one of the first theatrical animations, and it was part of McKay's like vaudeville act. But I do remember seeing that as a kid, like when you'd see something on you know related to Disney, but also like the history of animation or something like that. So I really like fell in love with these things, and then when it became very apparent it was in the public domain, it was like, somebody should make a video game about that. Wait, I guess I could. So I like design documented it out, and then I actually, because again, I didn't want to touch the Capcom game because that's Capcom's game, and um, the intellectual property is in the public domain, but Capcom's game is not. So obviously you can't make like a remake of that. You also you can't touch like the movie or anything. So it was like, well, let's base a game on the comic strip. So I started to think about like just the way that I game design, and kind of influenced by my architectural background, is like you find design precedents, right? You find things that like might seem like they would be good callbacks.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just at the time also first seen this game Little Samson, um, which if people don't know that one, it's a uh, it's a platformer for the NES, like from '92, that was created by a Japanese company called Takaru, and uh, published by, I think, Tecmo. Um, but no, that might not be right. But they Taito, not Tecmo, Taito, and basically you have like four different characters, and you can swap between them, throughout a level if the characters are like active and you haven't like run out their health bars. It's also just like this gorgeous pixel art, but it's a bunch of like former Capcom people going and starting their own company and making this new game. But it didn't sell well, so it's this like forgotten classic. And now, if you try to get it, it's like $2,000. So I was like, well, that stinks. This game is cool and these mechanics are cool. So what if Little Nemo, like Little Samson, but with Little Nemo characters? That might be cool. And it's way different now. Like we kind of piled on a bunch of other things, and it's become its own thing totally. But that was like the genesis, where it's like, well, what if Little Nemo, we use some of the characters that never got their time in the sunlight in the NES game because you just played as Nemo. But let's do these other characters like Flip and the princess, and we'll come up with like a new character as a fourth member of the party, because like the fourth character in the original comics, like it was made in 1905. It's a like horrific racial stereotype that we don't need to really go into, except that we were like, that's not good, but let's still have let's have like use this as an opportunity for representation, and have have a ask a like BIPOC artist to maybe help us like design a cool new character that can join this universe, and make it a welcoming universe, which is the thing you get to do when you work with public domain. But we started like this game design document like laid on my on the back burner for years, because like I designed it and then I was like, oh, that'd be too big. But then got together with some friends. They said, let's go for it. And that's when, again, we concepted it out, had that, person of color help us design the fourth character, do some really awesome stuff. And now we're on our way to Kickstarter. So, yeah.
Okay.
I hope that was coherent.
Yeah. And so, without giving away any like plans for it, like how will, like you said, it's a platformer, and that the Little Nemo game from way back when was also a platformer. Like, can you give us any more like information as to like the type of platformer it was, or what, like if someone just like sits down and plays it for an hour, like how like an hour of this game would play out?
Of Nightmare Fiends?
Yes.
Okay, so the way that Nightmare Fiends is going to be structured. So I said that, so I've talked a lot about like the Samson character switching, but its structure is going to be a lot more like Monster World, Shantae type experience where you've got a hub, and in those games it's like a town.
Mm-hmm.
In this game, it's Nemo's house because at the end of every little Nemo strip, he wakes up. Um, and what you can do in the house. So basically, like you're in the house, you go to bed, and then that takes you to. You can choose one of the worlds of Slumberland to choose to dream about, and there'll be a you know basically what we have with the Kickstarter is we're trying to raise an amount of money that we can. The goal is to raise an amount of money that like we could make something and put it out. Um, there are also stretch goals where it's like if we can get past that, we can expand the scope and have more levels, more character upgrades, um, more modes. So I don't want to say anything like that would promise stuff. So, but I might hint at like but if we can get more. Um, but the basic idea is that you go to bed, you can choose different levels, and the levels that we have laid out so far are the Mushroom Forest, which is also a level from the NES game, but it's also a thing from the comics. That's where the NES game level comes from. Um, there's a night sky level. There is Slumberland itself, like a big, you know, uh, sort of neoclassical looking palace. Um, there is an ice level right now. Now, again, if we can hit some stretch goals, we might also add this like kind of fun house level, not like a circus fun house, but like a architectural optical illusion fun house that really plays with like the surrealism that's in the comic. So
Mm-hmm.
we really that'll do like lots of cool game mechanic things, but that's definitely in the stretch goal realm. But then one thing that we also would include in the stretch goals is the level where you get to go and attack the Nightmare Fiends on their own turf. And that'll be a world based on like some of McKay's other comics that are actually pretty twisted and nightmarish. Some of his political cartoons, some of his more like the comics for grown-ups that were a little like more twisted and messed up. Um, so we want to make we want to be able to go to these worlds, but so you pick one of your worlds, and you're basically going to play through it as much as you can with Nemo. Along the way, you're going to pick up your other friends. Peony, the sort of like royal guard type character, her special ability is to climb up walls. Then there's Flip, who's like a mischievous clown character and Nemo's best friend. He has a grapple swing thing that he can do that's really cool. And then the Princess of Slumberland, who has like a Princess Peach style hover, she also like attacks with magic spells. But those characters help you reach new areas and explore more of these worlds. And when you do things like, find items or like beat bosses, you'll get a key, and then you can wake up as Nemo, and then you go look through your house, and then you use your key to unlock a new room in the house, and then in that room will be something that'll unlock a new world in Slumberland, and that's how you get all the worlds. So the house is really this like hub that you go to Slumberland to get the keys and then unlock the whole thing, and that is how you progress the game through the game. Is back and forth between the dream and the reality.
Okay. And, just you mentioned the Kickstarter, and assume you make, you like exceed your stretch goal and then some, and you're able to just, hit the ground running in terms of like its development and everything. Like, how long do you like expect this game to take to be like fully made and ready to be released?
So, one of the things that we really want to drive home for folks is that this is not our first rodeo in game development. Like we've made games before, we've made a lot of games before. and at like all different levels of the industry. Ben, who is our coder, but also has been like acting as a sort of de facto producer on our team. He worked AAA at like the publisher level, and so we've got everything laid out in terms of how we would spend the money, what we would do, what where we would allocate resources and things like that. So right now we're looking at probably past the Kickstarter, probably an 18-month development cycle. Um, give or take the normal stuff that happens during game development, but that is the we really don't want to draw this thing out too much, because like the more you draw it out, the less likely it is you're going to actually end up launching it. So yeah, 18.
Okay. And now we move on to the final question, which everyone who's ever been on the show previously always understands. Chris, in your opinion, is video games?
Art, yes. That's actually, I was thinking about this question while I was out on my run. So yeah, no, I mean, I mentioned this. I work with museums a lot, and it's not whether really video games are art anymore to these institutions even. And that's one of the wonderful things is that we've had like a few high profile successes of displaying video games. So it's pretty easy to prove that they're art, but I think what we need to do now is, okay, so if they are, we have to do two things. One, we have to, and again, I come from an arts and design background, so I think we need to get used to the idea that we're going to talk about them as art, and when we do that, people, the fan community, um, I've seen fans get really worried about that because it's like, oh no, you're being mean. It's like, no, no, no. This is you when you talk about, it's called art appreciation. When you talk about art appreciation, you're saying like, I like this, I don't like this, but that thing I don't like maybe is reflected in the art, is fixed in the artist's future work or things like that. You learn to like it's like analyzing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing we need to do is I think we need to do a better job of embracing that artistic dialogue, because I think that is the thing that we want to do, to kind of like work with, get games out into that art world. The other thing, and it's kind of related, is and one thing that I do with my work. So I'm doing it with Nemo. I've done it with previous games. So previous games I've made include one that's an abstract art game based on like the poster designs of this like Russian artist from 1920, Liziski. So I made a arcade game called Liziski's Revenge. That's like Yar's Revenge, but with Russian art, Russian abstract art. But then I also made a card game, like a storytelling Cards Against Humanity esque, apples to apples esque thing, but with like books of chivalry called La Mancha that was based on Don Quixote. Um, and what I'm trying to do with these, along these lines of like, hey, let's get games and art together, and fine arts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is let's just one of your questions, and we kind of covered it. You know, making games about existing IP and working with public domain IP. This is something that I've been doing for a while, actually. So all those things are in the public domain. And what's great about this is that you start to bring your video game into conversations where video games were not before. So what is Russian constructivist art? Well, that's art. I've had that game showed in art museums. My game and the original poster missed each other by only 2 weeks once, which was pretty wild. I've had the Don Quixote game picked up by Don Quixote scholars, and this is a book people spend their entire careers understanding, right? Which is kind of bananas when you think about it. But I've had it picked up by Don Quixote scholars. I've had it picked up by libraries. So, you start to, again, put games, the games people will come and play it because it's a cool game. The scholar arts folks will come and play it because it's about the thing that they are studying. And then suddenly they're in the same room doing the same activity, talking with each other. And then like dialogue is created. So with Little Nemo, I'm taking the history of animation. I'm doing literal hand-drawn keyframed animation, which is a lot of work. Sorry, you might have heard somebody just dropped something in the background. Apologize for that.
That's fine.
But we're talking comics historians, we're talking, graphics folks, animation historians, things like that, and now we're bringing all these things together because again, these are very related things, and now you have this one object. If you want to consider games one object instead of many objects, I'm not going to get into that. That's my other part of my research. But around this game thing, this object of art, which is the game. So that's besides making a cool video game that I would like people to enjoy and I would like to do well. That's also the thing that I really want to do with it is let's bring these worlds together and create dialogue and make the game landscape a better place.
All right, then. And with that, we come to the conclusion of this episode of the Pumpkin Copter Cast. I'd like to thank Chris Totten for joining me and just promoting his new game, Little Nemo and the Nightmare Fiends. And Chris, if people want to keep up to date and maybe interested in contributing to the soon-to-be-launched Kickstarter, where could they do that?
So the Kickstarter, we have a page at www.littlenemogame.com that auto forwards you to the Kickstarter. I'm on Twitter at Totter, Totter 87. But my studio's Twitter is at PFB, that's pie for breakfast, at pfbstudios.com. And, you can find it there. We're promoting pretty hard, so we hope people like it. And like I said, we're pretty experienced game developers. We've been around the block. We've released a bunch of stuff. And hold on. Sorry.
That's fine.
It's an argument. I have like a 4 and a 7-year-old, so sometimes there's a little argument. Anyway, so we're going to be promoting it pretty heavily. So like I said, we're very experienced game developers. We want I talked a lot about the sort of academic angle of this, but it's based on cool video games you've hopefully heard of and maybe loved. It's something that it's a dream game for us, and we're the kind of people who can actually make it happen. So if people we'd be honored if people would put their trust in us, and we will do our best to make sure that trust is earned.
Okay. And if you've enjoyed this, you can, and you'd like to support it, you can, go to youtube.com/thepumpkincoptercast, click subscribe, and hit the little bell icon so you get notifications, because everyone loves extra steps. And if for whatever reason, after you're done giving this soon-to-be-launched Kickstarter for Little Nemo and the Nightmare Fiends money, and you have some money left over, and you'd like to give me some money, you can go to patreon.com/thepumpkincoptercast, where for as little as $1 a month, you can submit questions for me to use in future interviews. And yeah, I've been Tyler, the host and absolute ruler of the Pumpkin Copter cast, and as I say at the end of every show, have a gourd day, everyone.